Hey there, hope all is well. Back at you today with more RTD news updates. Today I have a variety of articles covering various topics. The first one being the threat against cash. The next one is the SDR bonds being issued and its threat to treasuries. I have one here with some interesting graphs that will really put into perspective the idea of the Fed probably going negative pretty soon. I have one here from No Me Preens on the whole idea of money laundering and how that actually hurts you and I. And then another one here is just the crisis in general is escalating, dealing with monetary policy and world events. And then the last one here dealing with the Europe and the ECB, that they finally enter the end game. So let's dive into the first one. And as always, if you find these to be informative and interesting as well as educational, please share these with other people so that they can kind of find out what's happening in the news beyond, the Hillary collapse and things like that. Things that deals directly with their pockets and their financial future. And also, if you're new, subscribe for more RTD news updates and interviews. But let's dive into this first one. This here is from Bloomberg, and it's actually something I've spoken on in the past, and it has to do with a upcoming book or a book that's being released by a Harvard economist who's basically trying to kill cash. And so, as a new book makes the case that $100 bills will enable tax evasion and crime while thwarting aggressive monetary policy. And so here, just to give you a brief rundown of what it's about, I've actually mentioned on it before, so I won't dive too much into it, but it's below here in this video for you to read for yourself. But Kenneth Rogoff has an interesting resume. He's an international grandmaster of chess, former chief economist of IMF, professor at Harvard University, and he is now unofficially the #1 enemy of cash. And basically says, I'll admit it's a very quirky topic, Rogoff said at a press lunch on Tuesday, put together by the publisher of his new book, The Curse of Cash. And so basically what he's saying is law-abiding citizens rarely have need for $100 bills. So he's basically saying that you and I right now, more than likely, we don't have $100 bills in our pocket. Yet there are 34 of them in circulation for every woman, man, and child in the U.S. That suggests that bills are circulating mainly in the underground economy. If the biggest bill were worth $10 rather than $100, delivering someone $1 million under the table would require 220-pound chest rather than 22-pound briefcase. Forcing people to use smaller bills, Rogoff argues, might make crime more conspicuous and less convenient. And so Rogoff also contends that suppressing cash would make it easier for the Federal Reserve and other central banks to boost economic growth by pushing interest rates into the negative territory. So he's, another gentleman that is for possibly considering the negative territory as far as interest rates, which in their mind frame has to do with the idea of increasing spending to get the wheels moving. Less monetary easing and just force the policies to make people want to spend their own cash is kind of what they have in mind with these type of policies. Then it says Rogoff says he doesn't want to get rid of cash all at once. First, he would phase out hundreds, then 50s, then 20s, leaving smaller bills in circulation for the foreseeable future. I want to have a less cash society, not a cashless society, he said. And so he said law enforcement, are on his side because it makes it easier for, them stopping crime and things like that. And he goes on and on and on, talk about other things about what politicians are saying, how it can lead to other things that are not favorable by the public. But at the end of the day, this is just one of many guys who, in the days ahead, will continue to, just share their knowledge and their wisdom on how to, save the system, but it actually just, removes freedom from you and I. So, articles below if you're interested in reading more about it. Here's an article here from the Philosophy of Metrics, and it has to do with the idea of the yuan included in the SDR basket now. And it was written a couple weeks ago, but yet it's quite interesting how the author of this article here basically just says that now that the world has alternatives to U.S. Treasuries, it's not going to be favorable for us here in the United States because surrounding nations who for years in the past have had to rely upon using Treasury for the most part because they were the most liquid, now can begin diversifying away from U.S. Treasuries, which means they won't be in demand as much, which means the dollar will ultimately be devalued heavily because the Fed will be the only one having to really purchase those things, which will put more money into circulation. So, interesting article here. It's quite lengthy, but just to go through it a little bit, give you an idea of what's going on. It says, first, SDR-denominated bonds will allow for the diversification of the currency composition of foreign exchange reserves. This would allow the governments of emerging markets whose central banks have carried the bulk of U.S. Treasury bond debts for decades to minimize their exposure to the single currency treasury bonds and exchange rate pressures. Secondly, will provide Chinese investors with an alternative, which will slow capital outflows and could even potentially reverse and lead to large capital inflows. The Chinese monetary authorities have been very cool, very vocal over the last few years about the Fed not raising interest rates. This has provided time for the renminbi to be added to the SDR basket composition and to implement the SDR bond framework, which is now being utilized. And I wanted to just touch on the part where it says here, as the accumulation of U.S. Treasuries decreases and comes into balance with the international monetary realities, the dollar will be able to realize some much needed depreciation. Much needed. It's not really needed on my part, but that will be the end result, which could be in the range of 20 to 30% against the currencies of its larger trading partners. Such depreciation will make American goods more competitive and increase exports. This will lead to more job creation at home and help lower the debt to the GDP ratio and facilitate debt management, which will become more expensive as interest rates increase further. And as usual, those that are aware, if interest rates increase, it won't really help us out much because everything will begin imploding if they were to probably raise those rates up, because that will become more expensive and we'll be in trouble. So great article below. If you're interested in reading more about it, feel free. Here's another great article here from the Northmen trader. And this article here is another it's very lengthy, but yet there's a couple graphs that really stood out to me that I think kind of plays into these economists now that are kind of, pushing the idea of going negative here in the U.S. And so just to kind of thumb through it briefly and pick up right here, it says, what's driving all these ongoing and unprecedented policy actions? A simple structural reality. Growth has been slowing for decades. Intermediate recessions were handled with easy money, i.e. cutting the rates to jumpstart the economy, and increases in government debt. They call it stimulus. What is it really? It's debt. And so here it just goes on to talk about, visually give you an idea of what it's looked like over the last, 30 years or so, and how the real gross domestic product has gone through these little head and bounce type of things to a recession, to a decline. Head and bounce up in here, decline. Head and bounce, sharp decline. And then right here, we're in this head and bounce, and the next thing would be, assumably, a decline. But each trend has edged down closer and closer to zero, GDP wise. So from a high of 7, probably 8 or 9, down here to 5 back in 2014 to where we're at now, which, they always readjust it, so there's no telling what it really is now. But each box has etched down slower and slower to zero, which means that ultimately, if you're a betting person, that I would assume that it'll go this way before it goes that way. And that's just the GDP. And then, which has led to effective funds rate along with that. After each recession, here we go, they just drop the rates, boom. So it shows the decline. Box here gets lower, and we've been here since 09 or 2010 range. And so that leads you to believe that if each box keeps getting lower, the trend would be where? If we're at 0 right now, where would the next box happen to go? Probably in a negative territory. And then when it comes to debt, the federal debt, which each recession that we've had, the debt has spiked. So each box goes up and up and up and up. So if you were to just be, just to bet or guess, the next box will probably be up here somewhere, which is well beyond the 20 million mark where we're currently at now. So it's good to say that, the people who saying that, negative is not, negative is a possibility, according to these trends here, I would kind of say that they will probably have to try it, just because, the data here kind of shows that that's where we've been heading towards over the last couple of decades. So just my thoughts here, but yet I would love to get your thought on this particular graph here. So leave a comment below if you can. And then it goes on to say how the Federal Reserve Bank, their projections, and it's a complete fantasy how they have these bullet points showing that, by 2019, 2018, we're going to be at 4% interest rate type things, which they're saying is mathematically impossible. So interesting article here if you want to check it out. But definitely these graphs here are very telling of the trends of what's been happening And if things turn out to be as worse as a lot of people say they are, these right here can just go whoop right on to the zero territory and well below. So great article here if you're interested in checking it out. Here's another article here from the Daily Reckoning, and it's from Nobi Preens, and it has to do with why money laundering and offshore funds hurt you. And so she basically starts off talking about the whole release this past summer of the Panama Papers and how the release of that secret information kind of put into play the idea that there's a lot of big players out here that's been legally, hiding and maneuvering their funds in different tax type of saving and tax dodging accounts, all over the world, the Caribbean islands, you name it. And she kind of has the idea that the whole reason that the Panama Papers were released was based upon the fact that Panama, known as a tax type of hideout, wasn't playing along with what President Obama and Hillary Clinton was kind of trying to do as far as thwarting money laundering and playing along with the plans that the U.S. is imposing on the world with FATCA and things like that. And so, they thought it was best to just come out and then begin leaking some of the Russian, Chinese, and Brazilian people, put their names out right away and just, make a big fuss over it to kind of ruin the credibility and the dependency of Panama continuing to be a safe haven type of location. And so she basically mentions here that, things like that, banks such as HSBC, which she writes about, seem to be frequently now, are, people who have big money, decide to hide in places like that, and it's actually legal. And she talks about how that actually hurts you and I, because the more money that the heavy income earners are hiding, that means the less revenue the governments are making, which ultimately leads for them to be strapped for cash, where they have to continue to borrow more, which takes them further into deficits and increases the national debt. And then it also takes away from certain type of, as she put here, cuts funding for job creating endeavors like building U.S. infrastructure or defense. So it ultimately, all this hiding of funds basically just puts more of the burden for revenue upon the citizens themselves, those who actually work and are middle class, more probably not high and like 1%er, but that top 10 of 20% income earners that are to pay the most taxes anyway. So interesting article here. She goes on to talk about more of the banking structure and how the banking entities are, the CEOs and things like that are involved. They're in the papers and whatnot, and there's no real big fuss about it, because they're they're high net worth individuals, and no one seems to cares or make a fuss about it. So interesting article. If you're interested in reading more about it, you can check it out below. Here's another article here that deals with the banking situation in Germany and Italy, and it's from the Junior Gold Report, and it's entitled "The Crisis Is Escalating." And so it has here that Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank are presently discussing merger talks. The fact that these meetings are occurring is a signal that Germany's banking troubles are indeed accelerating. And so basically talks about here how the whole debt situation and the instability of the banks in Germany is increasing, and it's quite alarming that it's now becoming more mainstream as far as everyone really becoming interested in finding out more about it. And I'm assuming depositors as well are becoming concerned, because they're trying to remove their funds as well as cash out on some gold-backed type of assets that they purchased there. And so here this article just deals with the idea, explaining some of the troubles they're facing in the banking sector, and basically saying that they're not able to make any money or really make any that much of a profit, being that there's no rates or negative rates in most of the countries, to where they're not able to really offer their clients any ways of making money. So depositors are saying, hey, if I can't loan you my money and make anything, why are you holding it for me? So here's a chart here that shows that over 5,000 years of interest rates, they've never been this low, for this long a period of time. And so the fact that they've been able to go back into the record books at the sources from the Bank of England and Global Financial Data and Homer and Celia, A History of Interest Notes, digging back, to 3000 BC is kind of, that's a lot of time that we've been able to see here the amount of, the value of money and how people were able to gain interest on money, and how nowadays that's not possible. So just goes here to show that the trend is getting low, and it's hurting banks. And so Deutsche Bank is not merely Germany's biggest bank, but the political role that it plays in Germany is unique when compared to other countries. Deutsche Bank's importance to Germany is many times greater. many times greater than that of the investment bank like Lehman Brothers was in 2008 here in the United States. And then it goes on to talk about how the Italian banks are really having problems there. And it says that they know that the idea ECB they can't really count on the idea of bailing out these banks because there are too many and people wouldn't stand for that. So the bail-in policy is what they're going to use next. So they're basically telling people that if you have more than 100,000 euros or $1,100 as of today in the bank account, anything above that amount, you're going to lose that. So just as a heads up, so if you have more than $100,000, you won't be really getting that out. So to actually know that and to still keep your money in the bank if you have that much would be stupid. But I'm gonna imagine they're making it difficult for you to get that money out right now because it'll just cause too many red flags. But he goes on here just to give some information about how the German bank, Deutsche Bank, is interconnected with Commerzbank and how they are all interconnected, being that they kind of carry one another's burdens in some way or another, and it just gives a dollar amount that they're each connected with, and how once one crumble, they're all going to crumble. And then it talks about here how the importance of having gold, how central banks are now getting involved in the gold game, and how they're some central banks are buying gold and things like that. So it's only common sense that if the banks are doing it, that the individual should as well. So interesting article. If you're interested in finding out more about it, definitely a great graph to kind of get a visual of what it's like over the last 5,000 years to be living in uncharted interest rate territory. So interesting article. It's below. Here's the last article here, and it has to do with the idea that Europe and the ECB have officially entered the Endgame by Graham Summers on GoldSeek. And it starts off by saying the ECB has cut interest rates into negative territory 4 times. It has also spent $1 trillion in QE, bringing its balance sheet to a record high. These are truly extraordinary policies. Keynesian shills usually claim that the reason their policies don't work is because the central bank hasn't done enough. At 4 NERC cuts in 2 years and $1 trillion in QE, the ECB has most certainly done enough. And what has it got to show for it? The ECB now is exhausting its ammunition and appears increasingly powerless to do more under the legal constraints of its mandate. It has downgraded its growth forecast for the next 2 years, citing the uncertainties of Brexit, and admitted that it has little chance of meeting its 2% inflation target this decade, insisting that it is now up to governments to break out of the vicious circle. So basically, what he's saying is that all this implementation of policy that was told that would help stimulate the economy and spark growth hasn't done anything, and that they're going to begin doing some really crazy things pretty soon in the goal of reaching their target of inflation of 2%, which they're more likely going to adjust and probably crank it up to 4% and just have to inject a large amount of stimulus, as well as buying, the stocks and things like that, which they're already, talking about doing. So goes on to say, and we're talking about a banking system that is worth $46 trillion in size. This is more than twice the size of the U.S. banking system, which nearly took down the world in 2008. So its Europe goals is going to be exponentially worse than 2008. So interesting article here. This is the last one. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said before, share this to get the news out on the idea that all these monetary events are connected to the dollar, because everything revolves around the decisions made by the Federal Reserve System, and that affects your pocket immediately and your future. Subscribe if you're new. Looking forward to bringing more RTD interviews and news updates. Enjoy your day.